boy, to compare and contrast the difference in a nutshell between CEO who stays in the corner office and maybe goes out to the factory to yell and scream at people and blame them for problems. Well, Larry was the type to get out into the factory floor and to actually build relationships. And I was able to observe him, and he would do far more listening than he was doing talking. It was a different leadership style of where he was during the day. And it was much more of this collaborative, we're going to figure this out together rallying cry.
So, Mark, I like to try to tee up each episode by telling the guests that we're on Unlocking Moves, which we're here to talk about those key pivotal moments or decision points to really unlock the potential for leaders and entrepreneurs. And I want to hear stories because I think we learn best from stories. And I want to hear not just the glory stories. I want to hear the gory stories. I want to hear about those mistakes, which is apropos because my guest today is Mark Graban. I'm very excited about because we're going to talk about his favorite topic. That is mistakes and learning from those mistakes. So, but Mark, you know the drill. Before I dive in, I want to ask our guests an off-the-wall question or comment to really get them on their toes. You ready for this?
I'll brace myself. I think so.
I'm going to go back about 13 or 14 years. You wrote a blog post in 2010 about a great new game that came out on the Nintendo Wii called Wii Lean. And it was a game where they taught principles of lean management. Game had different characters that showed gamers how to polish the factory floor, how to identify defects on the line, and so forth. Tell me a little bit about that article.
Well, so that game was released on April 1st of that year. For a while, I was doing a series of different April Fools posts. I kind of got out of the habit. Some of that, this one might have been the most involved because I actually hired somebody to come up with a bunch of graphics where I think I did fool a couple of people where they thought it was a real game. And it's back in the era of like I was playing Wii tennis and Wii bowling. And I think I fooled a few people. I guess that's what made it a good April Fool's joke. I don't know if that would actually be a legit real product.
I can't imagine. I hope not. I hope not.
I didn't think about starting a company to do that. I think I would have been cautious about trying to see if there was product market fit for anything like that in the real world.
That's right. That's awesome. Well, I did find that. I did see it was April 1st. I did see that you had to change the title of the article to April Fools so that people didn't forward it. I also heard reports that several people did forward it to their entire email list. So congratulations to you for fooling people. A few years ago, we changed our name from Hire Better to Fire Better because it was such a popular topic. People needed to learn how to offload, offboard and fire people better. So awesome. Well, hey, thanks for playing along, Mark. As you can hear, my guest today is Mark Graban. Mark has built a career as a consultant in the lean management and operational efficiency world. He started his career at places like GM and Dell. Now, as you can see, he's with Kai Nexus, but he's probably most known for his podcast, which is entitled My Favorite Mistake, and a book that just came out entitled The Mistakes That Make Us. I will say one more thing about Mark. There you go. He's got the book right in front of him. That's proud author. I love it. One more thing about Mark, he's probably overeducated. He's got a bachelor's in industrial engineering from Northwestern and a master's and an MBA from MIT. Let's go. Mark Graban, welcome to the show.
Kurt, it's great to be here. It was such fun having you on my podcast. And thank you for letting me include some of your stories and insights in the book. Because when I think of Kurt Wilkin and I think of how you described yourself as a proud mistake maker, can you live with that?
That is absolutely true. And I'm still proud of that. And I'm so excited to talk about really one of my favorite topics, which is failure. And I can't believe I'm happy to talk about that. So, hey, let's start this off. I mentioned your podcast, My Favorite Mistake, and also your book, which is entitled The Mistakes That Make Us. The subtitle is Cultivating a Culture of Learning and Innovation. So my question is, Mark, why WTF? Why are we talking about mistakes? Why is your obsession about mistakes?
Obsession's an interesting word. I would, yeah, I'm an enthusiast. I have a passion for this. Sure, obsessed with it. It's an important topic. I think, throughout my career, going back to learning lean manufacturing based on Toyota, you spend a lot of time thinking about mistake proofing and protecting your customers from mistakes. So either, preventing mistakes or catching them early before they become a huge problem. And then, through my career, that I think that theme of preventing mistakes kind of got extended into, well, what happens when mistakes still happen? What are the different ways organizations and leaders in those organizations can react to mistakes? There are some reactions that I would argue just make the situation worse. There are some reactions that are more constructive. And so I did one book project. I don't have that book handy. Back in like 2015, it was sort of what they call an anthology book. I kind of Tom Sawyered it. No, it was Huck Finn did. I had other people. I'm botching my literary reference. I'm not a literary guy, but who was it? The character that got all his friends to whitewash the fence.
I think that was Tom Sawyer.
That was Tom Sawyer.
Yeah.
So when you do that with a book, it's called an anthology, and it's okay. So I wrote 2 chapters, and then I got 15 other people to write chapters. And the theme of the book, and the title was Practicing Lean, because you think of like, well, lawyers get to say they're practicing law, doctors get to say they're practicing medicine. If we're applying lean in manufacturing or lean in startups, we're practicing. Hopefully, we're getting better, and that means learning from mistakes. So each of those chapters, and starting with my own, I thought, well, I should go first. I shared stories from early in my career where I made mistakes that I'd like to think I wouldn't make today, with experience and having made that mistake. And then part of the message of the book, and this was initially, this was directed in the mirror at myself, was to be a little more understanding when somebody's new to a profession or to a discipline or a methodology. It's natural. You're going to make mistakes because your enthusiasm might outstrip your knowledge. You might not have a good coach helping you out. And so that book project was kind of the first major work on that theme of learning from mistakes. And I've been podcasting since 2006, podcast about lean management in different settings. And then in 2020, I wasn't able to travel as a healthcare consultant because of everything that was going on. And I was looking for other things to do. And, you have a podcast long enough, PR firms start reaching out and pitching guests. And that first podcast was so niche, but and I hated saying no sometimes. And they had pitched me Kevin Harrington, who was one of the sharks on season 1 of Shark Tank. He was like the guy who, love him or hate him, invented the 30-minute infomercial. That was his claim to fame. And I thought, well, I don't know if he's a fit for the Lean podcast. And I went back and forth with some PR people, like, what do you think of a business podcast about learning from mistakes? And Kevin said yes. And he came on and he was great. So, it was a topic I wanted to explore, but there was also that serendipity. I don't know if I would have been looking to start another podcast without that opportunity where I'm like, I'd love to meet Kevin Harrington. So let me create a way to say yes instead of saying no, he's not a fit.
I love that. So it sounds like that's probably going to be one of your unlocking moves, having this opportunity to have Kevin Harrington in front of you. And you said yes. A lot of people would say, no, that doesn't fit my script and I can't do it. So I applaud that. And I love the fact that you say you Tom Sawyered your book. I'm going to steal that phrase, Tom Sawyered your book.
For that book, Practicing Lean. The Mistakes That Make Us was all my writing with editorial help, of course.
Awesome. Well, you got most of your stories from your podcast guests, so you stole from them. So I want you to know that.
With permission.
There you go. Hey, I love that. I want to lean into the way you describe your book, and that is affecting culture and innovation. And so we're making mistakes along the way. Obviously, there's a culture impact. I want to learn about that. And I want to maybe through that talk about some of the ways that I can receive a mistake fairly and properly, or doing a bad job. So if someone makes a mistake on my project, so for example, my producer, who happens to be my nephew, is late to today's call, that's a mistake. I want him to learn from it, and I want to have a positive impact. What's some negative things that we could do along the way?
Well, I saw a lot of this going back to my time at General Motors. It's this angry, emotional, punitive response to mistakes. And I think that just ends up being really counterproductive. It doesn't change the fact that a mistake was made in a process or a bad decision was made in an attempt to innovate. Um, Maybe easier said than done, but getting upset doesn't help. And I think when the reaction is punitive, that just really teaches people to get better at hiding and covering up their mistakes or making up a story or deflecting blame. And I don't think that's any organization's path to excellence. I think we need to, sometimes acknowledge, okay, the impact of a mistake was serious or bad, but we're going to learn from it. And I think some people in the punishment crowd, I've heard people say things like, well, you have to punish the mistake or otherwise that gives people permission to make more. I'm like, I don't think that's how it works, right? A mistake is by definition unintended. Otherwise it's sabotage, right? You would punish sabotage. But I think we can make a choice to react in ways that are more constructive. So we can focus on learning and improvement. How do we prevent a repeat of the mistake? I think it's really hard, if not impossible, to do that when it's punitive. Because I've heard stories, I've started collecting stories now of somebody who fired the mistake maker, did nothing else to fix the way the work was being done, and it's just a matter of time. The replacement is probably going to make that same mistake.
I think it's Edward Cohen that has one of my favorite quotes is something along the lines of, the winners in life aren't the ones who never fail. They're the ones who never quit. They basically keep getting up and keep fighting. So love it.
Yeah, I love it. And there's, resilience that's required, I think, especially in the world of startups and entrepreneurship. And, that mix, I think of the co-founders of KaiNexus, have that combination of like, you've got to have the guts to go try something new and take the risk that you might fail. Or, they've done a great job of adjusting to any sort of setbacks in a way that's moved the company forward. So I admire that. I've never started a company in that way. I got involved with them early on, but they're first time entrepreneurs, but they've got a lot of these things figured out. At KaiNexus, because we try to be a culture of continuous improvement like Toyota. There's an expression that means a lot to us. The former CEO, current chairman, Akio Toyota, said something like, it's in Toyota's DNA that mistakes made once won't be repeated. Wow. And I'm not suggesting that the time to be punitive and upset and firing is when a mistake was repeated. I have repeated some mistakes within KaiNexus land, thankfully not company threatening, but still, like I see the irony of, as much as I talk about not repeating mistakes, sometimes I fall victim to some of the elements of being human that lead, I get distracted, I get rushed. I try to use things like checklists to prevent mistakes, but I think of a time recently where actually I wasn't watching the checklist close enough, and that was my mistake. And I should have known better, but so I'm admitting mistakes. So
especially for a lean management guy, you should definitely know better than to stray from your checklist.
I lesson learned, and and I blogged about it, and I'm trying to follow the example of people like you and Kevin Harrington and everyone else who's come on my podcast. I think it's a little cathartic for myself. Maybe it helps others. I mean, people know I'm not perfect, so I'll admit my mistakes.
Hey, I'll say it definitely helps others to know that they're not alone when if they do make mistakes. And I think the upshot is we all want to learn from those mistakes. So that's the thing I would hopefully inspire my listeners and viewers with is, you're going to make mistakes, learn from them. So
and I think that the other lesson is, have a checklist and be super disciplined and diligent about using it.
That's coming from a lean manufacturing guy. Kurt doesn't have a checklist. So I obviously repeat the same mistakes over and over again. So, all right, well, let's shift gears. I want to talk about my book, Who's Your Mike? A no bullshit guide to the people you'll meet on your entrepreneurial journey. just a quick question. And that is, I know you're a fan, and I know you read the book because we talked about it. It's been a year, but I know you talked
Right.
about it. Tell me about your favorite character. Who's your favorite character? Is it somebody like Mike, who's your bookkeeper turned controller turned CFO, who's in over his head? Is it maybe uh, uh, Harry the Hustler, who is your best sales guy, and you promote him into a sales leader role because that's the next logical step? But he's not a sales leader; he's a sales guy.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that resonates. I mean, that trap of taking your best individual performer and putting them into a manager role, that doesn't work sometimes in engineering, in the manufacturing world, or in nursing leadership or physician leadership. Organizations make that mistake all the time. But it's, I don't know if I'd say favorite, but thinking of like Pipeline Paul. I first worked for a startup that's no longer in business. It got sold and then kind of got shut down. This is going back like 20 years ago. It's probably okay to talk about it. And I won't name names, but it's not KaiNexus. But it's just interesting to see the difference in entrepreneurship approaches between the two companies in many, many ways. And part of that, I think, was the approach to forming a sales team and sales leadership, which is not my domain, but just as an observer. That first company was pretty quick to hire and fire. And, and there was always a lot of potential, always a lot of promise, not as many deals actually closing. And it seemed like the company had a really short leash. Like, I don't know if the problem was the salesperson or the problem is deeper in the company and the messaging and the positioning, and people didn't talk about product market fit, but we were struggling to find it. So if the company made a hiring mistake, were they making a different mistake by giving up on somebody too quickly, hiring someone else to come in and be another Pipeline Paul? And I think the only other reflection, is thinking about, like, I think the one time I'm like, okay, I'm glad you fired that guy. That was more a matter of personality and behavior more than performance. Think of like the quadrant of like getting the right results the right way, getting the right results by being a jerk. Well, this was kind of in the category of not getting the results and just being kind of abusive to some people. That's a different situation that got addressed maybe a little more slowly than it could have. But KaiNexus though has had a lot of stability. There's been turnover, but we've had the same chief revenue officer. He started off as VP of sales. He's been with us for like 8 years now, and the company's been on a better growth trajectory. So the performance of getting the right results the right way, there's been more of that within the sales team at KaiNexus. But it's interesting. I think the old company had good people, right? But it just sometimes goes to show it just doesn't work out.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of things there. One, yeah, Pipeline Paul generally does not deliver results, and so these versions of Paul for your previous company were not. And you touched on my appendix, which is the part of the book that's at the end. It's about the leader, and it's entitled "When You're the Problem." And oftentimes, these early stage companies don't have systems and processes and structure and collateral and a story and all the things that a lot of these sales folks need to sell. And so as a byproduct, they run through a lot of salespeople who aren't successful because they need some of those things to succeed. So the challenge is finding somebody who can build all those things and ultimately some people who can sell those things.
Yeah. Well, can I tell one other story though that reminds me of the cycle of we're going to keep firing people until somebody figures it out. Like even
Absolutely.
when I was at Honeywell, which was the opposite of a startup, a big, huge, giant manufacturing company. There was one business unit that underperformed and really struggled. And one day I heard our vice president's admin talking about so-and-so, was leaving the company, had been fired after like a year in that P&L role. And I hadn't been there that long to really know the context, but I remember her saying something to the effect of, "Boy, this happens every year. I hope they can finally find somebody that can turn that ship around." And I'm like, I don't know who else would want to get on that ship. It sounds like if it's not sunk, it's rapidly sinking. And, look, these are judgment calls and business decisions around whether you still have faith in that leader turning it around. But sometimes, if the underlying core business is so rotten, I don't know who could turn it around.
Well, it's funny. We see that in the sports world where the organization goes through 3 coaches in 3 years. And at the end of the day, is it the organization, Vegas Raiders, or, Washington Commanders, or, you name it, or is it the coach? So,
Yeah.
hey, I want to go to our unlocking move. And I want to talk a little bit about that key pivotal moment or decision point for you. And perhaps we talked about it earlier, but tell me what it might be for you.
Well, I think there's a number of those unlocking moments. And one, I mean, I don't know if I would say this is my favorite mistake, but I think there's recognition sometimes. A lot of people on my podcast talk about career mistakes, the job they regret taking, the job they regret quitting, things like that. Have long enough career, you're bound to make one of those mistakes, I bet. But I started my career coming right out of college at General Motors in 1995, and that was it was a very old school, yelling and screaming, command and control environment. Like it was a really nasty environment. And a lot of times, even those first 6 months, I'm like, man, I made a mistake. This is not the right place to be. The culture here sucks. We didn't use phrases like toxic environment, but at that point, I think it was a pretty toxic environment. I'm glad I stuck with it though, because even within all of that craziness and poor performance and leaders who didn't turn it around, there were some people there that were great mentors of mine. Like GM on one level was trying to hire people from companies like Nissan and Toyota suppliers, and like, you're going to come in and teach us how to be more like Toyota. Well, our plant manager wanted nothing to do with that, and was happy if they would just sit and stay out of the way all day. But I was young and eager, and I knew things, like I knew what was going on around me was not the way. So they spent a lot of time coaching and mentoring me, of telling me about how it could be, how it was different at their organizations, and how much of it was really about leadership. And then we got a new plant manager after a year. And he was one of the first GM people to ever go work with Toyota at their joint venture factory in California. That's now the Tesla building, ironically enough. But I saw, in that second year, I'm glad I stuck with it, because the education I would have missed was to see how that new plant manager, behaving differently with different mindsets and different leadership styles, was starting to unleash the 800 people who worked in that factory, salaried and hourly. And that really solidified to me, like, sometimes you need to make the coaching change. You can't fire all 47 players on the NFL roster. Sometimes you got to shake it up. And sometimes an outsider coach is required to come in and shake up the culture, because the old coach, is kind of, responsible for what was there, and they can't admit the culture sucks, because that means they think they suck. But anyway, I learned so much from that second year at General Motors, to have the compare and contrast of roughly first year, second year. And one of those key mentors had attended that program at MIT. And I would have never had MIT on my radar. I thought it would stay in the Midwest and, go to Michigan or go back to Northwestern or get a great MBA somewhat locally. But he really opened my eyes, and it turned out that program at MIT, that engineering MBA manufacturing program, was the perfect fit. And he saw potential in me and encouraged me to go for it. And that really ended up opening up so many doors for me in life and in my career. So I'm thankful that I suffered through some of that GM bullshit to get something good out of it.
Well, a couple of things I heard there. One is that leadership matters, and the right leader can get the most out of their team and maximum performance and all the good stuff. I also heard that there was a plant manager that opened your eyes. So that was the leader. And I'm not sure if he was the same person that was a mentor or not, but let's talk about, do you mind naming those two if you're comfortable, and thanking them perhaps?
Well, so the plant manager was not the MIT direction setter, but Larry Spiegel, who was the plant manager, he's been retired from GM. He was teaching at the University of Michigan. It's just, I remember him telling everybody in an all hands meeting once, quite literally, something like, the era of blaming the workers is over here, that we're going to succeed together. And like, it was inspiring and there was a lot of truth to it. And then the other person I'll give a shout out to, Steve Chong, was my coworker. He's one of those people that GM, one part of GM said, yeah, we want your help. And everyone else was like, no, we're good. But he was the one, I think without Steve's encouragement, my life would be, and my career would be very, very different. I say my life would be different because I took that job at MIT. I'm not going to tell you my life story, but I took that job at MIT. 1999, got hired into Dell. That was like peak Dell, in hiring and growth and reputation and everything. And then because of that, I met my wife. So, taking that job at Dell in a way wasn't the greatest fit either. So then I think, maybe the problem is me. But I think I also learned, that was when I went to a startup. And I do think I like working better in smaller organizations, and I'm happy with how things have been turning out.
Well, so thank you for naming those folks, Steven Siegel and Alan Tron.
Larry Spiegel and Steve Chong.
There you go. Well, and such an impact they made on you. One, as a leader that you observed, who wasn't sitting in his corner office and on the computer all day. He was actually walking the factory floor and asking questions. And I love the fact that you had a mentor that inspired you to make a change and go to MIT. And you, I just want my listeners to know they make an impact, or you can make an impact on the next generation. And how awesome would that be to be 20 years later, have somebody like Mark Graban talking about you impacted him to make moves in his career.
And I'm going to ruin that sweet sentiment that you're sharing there by making a snarky comment that I guarantee that plant manager was not using a computer. So that's how my world changed from General Motors 1995 to Dell 1999.
That's awesome. That's all. He was on his Abacus doing. I don't know what he was doing.
He probably used the word secretary, who was probably using a typewriter. It might have been an electric typewriter, but
there you go.
It was old school.
Hey, Mark, I want to ask you another question. So I consider myself the listener's advocate, and I want to ask the question that if I'm a listener, I've got Mark here one-on-one, what kind of question would I want to ask? Obvious one is, what's your favorite mistake? You talked about that a little bit, but I want to hear your biggest mistake, your biggest foul up, screw up, something that you don't talk about publicly. Like, tell me something gory.
Yeah, and I love that phrase, the glory, not the gory, not the glory tales, the gory tales. I'm butchering that. That's my most recent mistake. That's one I think about. Like, I've never screwed up so badly that I've gotten fired for it. I don't have one of those stories, but here, no. I'll tell a story where, okay, this fits your criteria of like, this is a story that I wouldn't love to tell, but I will. When I think back to, again, without naming names, but this was related to a consulting firm that I was doing a lot of subcontract work with. And my biggest mistake with that was I allowed some of my behavior and my reaction to things that were upsetting, I think really damaged some relationships with some people at that firm. And I'm not a hothead, but I think I get principally based on when I've learned something that triggers me, I guess, when I feel like certain principles that I hold deeply are being violated. And I'm probably more snippy or terse or cutting than I am angrily yelling and screaming. But either way, people don't like that. Even if I'm in the right, and I think one of the mistakes was even not just being unable to control some of that reaction, but I think, eventually I did reach out through an EAP program, an employee assistance program, to talk to a counselor. Like, why do I get so fired up about these things? And why do I feel like it's hard to control that impulse to type out an email that I know isn't going to land well, and I probably shouldn't be hitting send on, but like the impulsiveness in terms of reaction. And so I think one of the mistakes was, not trying to get some help like that sooner. And I think, there's no shame ever in going to talk to somebody labeled as a counselor or a therapist to try to understand yourself and your own emotions or your own reactions to things and figure out, well, are there things I can do about it? Are there certain root causes, where I can sort of try to prevent reacting that way? Yeah, I mean, I think if I could go back, there are certainly things I would have done differently. And that would have been, I think asking for some, I don't know, I'm going to use the phrase professional help, because, it was things that was affecting my professional life, not really my personal life. Yeah, so there's some regret about not getting a better handle on some of that earlier on, when it might have been more easily repairable, instead of kind of getting to a point where I'm like, okay, I think I need to just move on.
Well, I'm glad you recognize that. And I can't tell you the number of folks that I've talked to who have a history of being an asshole earlier in the career. And now they are gracious and they've learned from it. And now they're better human beings as a result, whether they sought professional help or whether they just matured, right? Or had a good mentor or something. So I appreciate you sharing that mistake.
Sure.
I've got one more question for you, and that is a bit of a trick question. And that is, tell me one question that you're never asked and you kind of secretly wish somebody would ask you, or you're kind of glad they don't.
That mistake, that question has tripped me up before. And I think, oh, it's a mistake to not be prepared for a question like that. So what's a question I wish people would ask? Gosh, there's so many.
Should we dive into should we dive into your backyard pizza obsession?
Yeah, right. Because that was the thing I came up. Oh, you bailed me out, Kurt. That was the thing I came up with. And I did pull that out of memory. One other time someone asked me that question, but yeah, I wish you would ask me about my backyard pizza oven. I wish you would ask me about my backyard pizza oven.
Pizza oven. All right, tell me more.
So that's a hobby and a passion of mine. A backyard wood burning, call it a pizza oven. We occasionally cook other things in there, but it's primarily, for Italian style, Neapolitan style pizza. So my wife and I used to live in Phoenix, Arizona. There's a famous, acclaimed pizzeria there called Pizzeria Bianco. Highly recommended. It's still there. 2 locations now in Phoenix. They've got one in Los Angeles. He really was the innovator of bringing wood oven pizza to America, or at least popularizing it. And it's really spread like wildfire now. But when we moved to the Dallas area in 2005, nobody was doing that in the area yet. And we were going to put in a grill and do a little bit of an outdoor kitchen project. And it kind of floated like, well, maybe we could do a pizza oven. And my wife was excited about the idea, and we did it there. And then we also put one in into a house that we have today. First pizza oven, which ironically enough, there were some mistakes in it being constructed by the contractors that we hired who did not follow the instructions from the company that sold the pieces and the parts, and they framed it up with wood when the instructions said to frame it up with metal.
Oh no.
900-degree pizza oven. It took a couple of firings for that wood to dry out and literally catch fire inside of the stone enclosure. There's a bonus mistake story. But we got past that. We found a contractor who would follow the instructions, and it was fine. And it's just been a real love of kind of like practicing that craft of, trying to, if you will, perfect my pizza making. I love the film. I don't know if you know Jiro Dreams of Sushi.
No.
It's this documentary about a Japanese sushi chef. And I'm not saying I'm at his level, but that film shows like this very Japanese approach of like working at something and aiming for perfection and realizing you're never going to get there, but you keep working at it. And you want your pizzas today to be better than the last pizzas you made. And sometimes you screw them up and you learn something. So anyway, I probably overthink the damn pizza making now that I'm talking about it.
Well, always getting better. I will warn you, one of my previous podcast guests was my brother, Rolf Wilkin, who happens to run about 7 pizzerias in Northwest Arkansas called Eureka Pizza. And he would tell you that the biggest mistake people do is trying to make their own pizza at home. Call the professionals, call Eureka Pizza.
I think if you have with the specialty oven, sure. The regular indoor oven, you probably wouldn't do better than a pizzeria. But
well, challenge accepted, I'm afraid. He's gonna challenge you.
But I'm a picky customer then. I don't know what style pizza your brother does, but when I go to places that say they have wood-fired ovens, and a lot of times it turns out they're gas, and they're not running them hot enough, because I think customers complain of like, oh, the pizza was burnt. And so I think they learn to run it at a lower temperature, and all that does is brown the pizza in a way that dries out the crust instead of having those little blackened specks of char. So I don't want to run a restaurant, man.
Well, I got to tell you, so Max, who you met earlier, his dad is Rolf. And so Max, if Rolf is listening, get his ass over here and challenge Mark to a fight right now.
You mean a pizza bake-off, right?
I don't think that's a fight you want to enter, Mr. Graban.
Okay.
All right. Hey,
I'm a pizza lover, not a pizza fighter.
There you go. I love it. Hey, on that note, we're going to wrap this puppy up. Mark, thanks so much for being here. I ask all my listeners and viewers to please go like and subscribe to Unlocking Moves on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or iTunes, wherever you consume your podcast. I would really, really appreciate that 5-star review. And Mark, thanks again for sharing your mistakes and being my willing guest today on Unlocking Moves.
Yeah, thank you, Kurt. This has been fun. Thanks for bringing up some great questions and topics.
Awesome.